Hi, my name is Daniel Bigler. This is my term project PowerPoint for Introduction of Ethics. We're going to be going over generative AI, going over a couple of the more contentious, controversial questions and dilemmas surrounding it, and analyzing them from two different ethical perspectives. So jumping into it, we gotta figure out what is generative artificial intelligence, which I'll be just calling GAI from now on because it's a mouthful. GAI programs such as ChatGPT, not listed here. Also, you may be familiar with Google Gemini. The younger crowd might recognize the Snapchat AI companion. It's going to be the front end, but we're looking more at the back end here. So the large language model is, you can think of as the gears that function the whole thing. They're trained on tens of thousands of examples of an output by reading the internet, combing it, compiling it, and pairing it up with questions with the answers. That way later, when you submit the question, it says, hey, I've got that one stored. Here was the answer that I saved with it. It's important to get here right out of the gate. It doesn't understand any of the text. It's not designed to. It doesn't try to. All the LLM does is looks at the internet, finds questions, finds the answers that someone else potentially submitted to it, and saves them as a pair. All right, so let's move my face. All right, so let's break it down a little bit simpler. So the LLM, like I said, it's going to comb through all publicly available internet forums. If it's not locked behind a password or a login, it is accessible to be used as training. You can think of things like Wikipedia, social media, blogs. If you can search for it on Google, it's fodder. The model has no capacity to detect incorrect data. It doesn't try to. The LLM, or when an LLM is given the user interface, think like a website or some sort of portal that you can interact with it through, then we would refer to it as a GAI. So again, the LLM is the nuts and the bolts and the gears. The GAI is like, chatgpt.com, typing in stuff, getting responses. Oh, and that was my next paragraph. All right, so now here we have an example. This is why I'm really leaning into that capacity for fact checking. Here's Google Gemini just launched a couple of months ago, and it immediately had a whole bunch of viral screenshots going around where it was trying to post AI overview responses to questions. The AI didn't have any gate on what it was trained on. It was trained on anything that was compiled in Google. If you could search for it, it was in there. So this example made it onto the morning news. The people were up in arms about it, talking about how they were going to sue Google for damages, stuff like that. What had ended up happening was someone made a joke on Reddit saying that you could smoke 2 to 3 days or cigarettes per day while pregnant. And that was the primary answer. And then the AI looked for, because it doesn't just look for one answer, it does look for what the average consensus on all of its data is before submitting it. But with that one key, it then searched for similar answers and found like mom blogs talking about how they used to smoke a pack a day. What should they do? They just got pregnant. And then other, commenters replying, we'll try to cut it down to 2 to 3 and then hopefully entirely quit. As well as, old science 50 years ago, doctors just told you to smoke. Before my time, I wasn't there. So, all of these bad overlapping situations culminated in this happening. Google did have to go in and manually correct it, as well as dozens, if not hundreds, of other automatic ones. One I've seen is if you Google safe cooking temperatures for certain meats, it still has incorrect data there based on just other people posting incorrect information on the internet. All right, so now before we can delve into whether or not generative AI is moral or immoral, we have to define our questions. And the most contentious and controversial questions drive a lot of animosity in their discussion because there's two very similar questions that have very important distinctions. which causes a lot of people to misspeak and talk past each other and misunderstand each other's arguments. So we're going to split this into two. We're going to say or ask, is it immoral to train a large learning model without the without the user's consent for their data? This is going back to all those social media posts and Wikipedia articles I was mentioning. The creators of that content were not consulted when their information was used to train the computer, and that breach of consent is concerning. And then the second question is, once the generative AI has already been trained, once the LLM is already fully functional, is it still immoral to utilize their services? This is a big argument we see on the internet. People will say, well, I had nothing to do with that, but I found this cool website. What's the harm? The harm's already done, right? So we're going to focus on this first question for now. The second one's a little hairier, but we will get to it. Should have thought this through. All right, so utilitarian ethics. From a utilitarian lens, a moral act imposes more good than bad on the world, while an immoral act is the inverse. In this framework, good and bad refer to the people of a society's reaction to that action. We have the famous trolley problem that shows, is it harm reduction? If we pull the lever and we hit one person and save 5, that's a moral act, even though some would argue that we killed somebody by, they weren't in harm's way and we put them in harm's way. But more people were helped than were harmed. It is the ethical lens of converting, hard ethical questions into calculations that we can more definitively answer, rather than making it a value judgment. In a true utilitarian argument, you would also put the quality of the good or the bad into the equation. You couldn't say, like, killing someone is worth saving 3 people from paper cuts, because those are not equivalent goods and bads. Though for this argument, we will not be doing that, because in my opinion, the values of the good and the bad are too contentious to do justice in a project of this size. So, applying the utilitarian ethics, we're going to convert it into a math equation. Every good impact counts as 1, every bad impact counts as -1, and like I said, we're just normalizing the good and the bad. I do not believe that the good and the bad here are equivalent. I do believe that they're close enough, and you'll see with the numbers later, that it doesn't change the ultimate takeaway from this lens. So GAI applications all across the globe, from ChatGPT, Google, just every single company combined, have a market of 300 million users. That's unique users, so if you use it multiple times, you still only count as one. And we're going to charitably assume that every single person that used it enjoyed it in some way. They had a pleasant experience, and all of these pleasant experiences were equal in value with infringing on someone's consent. A single LLM, just the one, named OpenAI, which is the backend for ChatGPT, which is somewhat a household name, especially in the academic area, was trained on 45 terabytes of data in 2020. That training infringed on the consent of any individual who posted publicly on the internet prior to 2020. So since its conception to 2020, anything that was not locked behind a password was available to be used as fodder for ChatGPT. This is data, by the way, for ChatGPT 3, their third model. They are currently training their 6. Their flagship GPT-6 is what they're working on right now with a huge data center, but they have not released any information. What information is out there is from unreliable sources, so I used as much current information as I could. It is safe to assume that their latest model is likely at least twice the size of ChatGPT 3, but likely more. They did confirm in interviews that part of their training set was all of the social media platforms, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, and it would be uncharitable to assume that anyone who writes academic articles or blog posts or anything of the sort doesn't just also have a social media platform. And since we know that all of social media was combed, we'll just use that number of 4.95 billion active users, which again was the 2020 number. So looking at the graph here, it's a pretty one-sided. If you normalize infringement of consent as a bad and value with the, you got the cool experience of generating something, maybe it saved you time, effort, maybe it's just like made a really cool piece of art that made you really happy. If we think those are the same value, vastly more people had their content stolen without consent, which proves LLMs and GAI programs to be immoral from a utilitarian lens. Whew. There we go. All right, so getting into deontological ethics. Here we go. To explore this ethical lens, we're going to use the first of Kant's formulations of categorical imperatives, which he defines as, I'll just read the quote, "I ought never to act in such a way that I couldn't also will that the maxim on which I act should be a universal law." Putting that into normal speak, he believes an action can only be moral if he found himself in a scenario and wanted a certain outcome, so he took that action. That has to be able to extend to anybody who could hypothetically find themselves in that scenario should also be able to take that action without facing societal consequence. This word consequence is very important for the argument moving forward. Consequence can just mean bad, obviously. It has negative connotations, but it mostly just means change. If the society significantly changes, that is a consequence to the actions. A good example of when this is important is the example we went over in class. If everyone became a thief, our societal concept, our construct of private property, since it has no physical existence, it is just a construct, it would vanish. If nobody respected property, then property would not be a word anymore, it would just be a theory. And so some people might hypothetically argue that abolishing private property is good. It's a good thing for society. That's not what Kant is arguing here. It's that it is a consequence, which it could be good or bad. It's neutral. Hello? There we go. Sorry about that. All right, so applying the deontological ethics, we're going to build our hypothetical scenario. We're going to extend that scenario to the entire potentially affected population, anyone who could find themselves in that position. And then we're going to consider if it has a societal consequence, if anything would, blow up. So our hypothetical is going to be scenario, a specific piece of content does not exist. You get the idea, man, I sure wish I had this piece of paper, this fan fiction, this academic article. So desired outcome, you want it to exist. You tried Googling it, it wasn't there. So they took the action of generating it using a GAI program rather than, creating it organically, traditionally. So if we extend this to the entire population, there is a concerning implication from the starting point of the hypothetical onward. All new content in the world would just be derivative of previous content. It would be reused, recycled, repurposed. That being said, there are no immediately visible societal consequences. There's absolutely a value judgment to be made for the cost of no new writing. We would stagnate in art, in writing, in research. But no one would go to jail. Nobody would die. So I believe it's a gray zone, but I think deontologically it would be moral, scaled up to the larger hypothetical. That being said, this isn't part of the assignment, but I thought it was interesting. I wanted to include it. That hypothetical just feeds back into the utilitarian argument to highlight just an interesting thing to think about. An LLM doesn't need to be retrained unless something new has been made and needs to be added to the database. You could retrain it to be more efficient, but that would just be with the same data. Either way, the bad impact value of anyone who uses social media wouldn't increase. It's the same information that just keeps getting recycled. That being said, if the entire global population of 8.1 billion people are using these services and having a great time, it gives us this new graph where it's now become, in a utilitarian sense, morally acceptable, which kind of puts a spotlight on how the loss prevention mentality works. If the only reason hurting this many people is immoral because we're not helping more people, all things considered, then many issues can be solved by just helping more people, and suddenly the equation becomes better. Again, not part of the assignment. I just thought it was an interesting that the deontological hypothetical also changed the utilitarian impact. Yeah. All right, so here are two questions again. We saw in the first question, it was somewhat clear-cut. Utilitarian said no. Deontological said, maybe yes. The second question, though, is a little bit hairier. Is it immoral to use the generative AI once it's already been trained? And I think the reason this question is harder to prove through these lenses is because it is lacking context. It makes assumptions in the question. It begs a question of, who's responsible? Is it the people who are driving the service? It gets very value judgment-y. I want to give us a little more context that, I didn't want to bog down the beginning of the presentation. We didn't need it for the first two, but let's jump back into a little background before we dive into this one. So now we're going to get into the ecological impact of generative AI. OpenAI, like I said, that's a typo. They are currently on GPT-6. But they did release emission reports for their development of GPT-3 in 2020. That's where the data on slide 1 came from. And just the development, so just building the supercomputer and the warehouse, the servers, released 626,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. In addition, the hardware required to operate these services degrade really quickly. They fall apart. A computer can only do so much before the chips melt. Or crack, or for whatever reason need to be replaced. At our current trajectory, by the end of 2024, the upkeep of replacing this degrading hardware is estimated to have generated 120 million tons of electric waste. These are computer parts, so we've got lead, we've got mercury, we have a lot of bad chemicals, and with our current disposal practices, we kind of just dump them, which makes those chemicals seep into the groundwater in the areas, as well as polluting the atmosphere. That's a different PowerPoint. We're not going to jump into that. Cooling the servers, this is now maintenance for ongoing usage, takes a lot of water. Once GPT-4 had already been built, like the computer, it then took 11.5 million gallons of water to keep it cool while it combed that internet I was talking about earlier, while it was just getting all the information. So again, that's not counting the pounds of carbon dioxide in the first bullet point. That's just training it. And then here's where we get into the user side. Like again, people might say, well, I didn't have anything to do with that, but once it's built, isn't the damage done? No, every time you click the generate button, it consumes about 16 ounces of water. That's about a water bottle, just keeping the servers cool while it crunches the numbers and gives you the prompt you're looking for. This number is much, much worse with graphical generative AI. If you've ever generated an image, I don't have it on this slide, but that's something like burning down a tree and a half. It's real nasty stuff. All right, so now the question, like I said, is worded in a difficult way. So we're going to shift it to a positive. Instead of asking to prove the negative, we'll say, is it moral to utilize the generative AI despite its toll on the planet? This is a much more specific question and much easier to answer. And I believe by answering this question, you also answer the previous one without running the risk of miscommunicating or talking past whoever you're speaking with. Ooh. All right, so applying the utilitarian ethics to this question. We've got the trolley problem again. Again, we'll count goods as 1, bads as -1. Everything's normalized. This one absolutely should not be normalized. Again, this is just for the scope of the assignment. I can't really get into the nitty-gritty. Good impact value, again, number of total users across the planet is 300 million. Bad value is now the number of people who live in an ecosystem, anywhere that requires water to be drinkable, and the temperature to not melt your face. That's going to be everybody. When damage to the ecosystem is normalized in value with you had a cool time, vastly more people are harmed in the equation, proving Guy programs to be immoral from a utilitarian lens. Ooh. I have to move fast. I'm running a little long here. All right, applying the deontological ethics. Ooh. We'll build the scenario, same strategy. Our hypothetical is going to be it does not exist. We want it to exist, so we generate it. When extended to the entire population, this hypothetical now has cataclysmic implications. At our current rate of ecological impact, 300 million users equates to 120 million tons of electric waste and 150 billion milliliters of water every year. Scaling this consumption to the global population results in 3.24 billion tons of electronic waste and 1.06 billion gallons of water every year. And that water is just from people clicking the generate button. And that's if people keep on going at the same trajectory they're going right now. That's not the case. In reality is exponentially growing. People are using it more and more. The average user now clicks that generate button way more times than they did a year ago. This does also not account for the development of additional LLMs, additional warehouses, that type of stuff, which there would have to be many more of them to be able to handle that amount of demand. The massive ecological devastation does count as societal consequence. If everyone is dying from global warming, that is bad. So this is deontologically unethical, hands down. Recap, here are the three. An interesting argument here is how can, if the impact on the ecosystem is so glaringly bad, if like people are going to die from this, don't we now need to readdress the first question with this context? Why did you withhold the context of the ecosystem for the first question? And I don't know. I don't know the correct answer here. I believed when I was making the assignment that I needed to argue in good faith. So the first question is just about consent. It is just about how many people were harmed from their consent, not so much how many people are like going without drinking water now. So with the context of also like the forests are burning down, the Amazon's on fire, I believe all four of these would be X's, but in a vacuum, I do believe the deontological lens has the gray area to lean yes for the first question. All right, now practical solutions for progress. These are going to be aimed more at the people who develop these programs than the average person, but we'll get to that in a second. So how can we morally train a large learning model on user data? Just ask for their consent. Just say, hey, is it cool? Do you want to opt in, opt out? Can we use your data to build our services? Tons of apps do that already. It's still a little dodgy, but it's better than not asking. Or pay people. Generally, when you provide a service to a company, you get money for it. So these AI companies are just stealing data. They could earn a lot of goodwill by just sending people checks for the profits that they've made, but they're not actually making any profits. Again, different PowerPoint. All right, and then how can we morally utilize generative AI despite its toll on the planet? We can design the LLM models that are more energy and water efficient, less damaging to the planet to train them. Or we could enforce carbon neutral policies on tech companies. The EPA could force them to reinvest their profits into environmental programs that offset the damage that they've caused. Again, we're going at a utilitarian lens here. It doesn't matter if they, burned down a whole forest to build a computer, if they also planted 2 forests. I don't actually agree with that, but from a utilitarian lens, that would be moral. And then for regular users, again, a lot of this advice doesn't really help you if you're just a student and you think it's neat. My advice to you is don't do it. Don't dump out a bottle of water to write your discussion post for you. Just type it up. That's real active advice there. All right. Thank you very much. This was my presentation, and all of my citations are here.